Republicans will use their new majority in the U.S. House of Representatives to intensify Washington's focus on China and more closely monitor aid going to Ukraine. But they insist they have no plans to stop support for Kyiv in its fight with Russia. The real impact is going to be on agenda setting and oversight, said Scott Anderson, an expert on governance at the Brookings Institution. Republicans plan to focus on beefing up supply chains to support production of essential components like semiconductors in the United States. Republicans want more oversight and accountability on foreign help and participation by U.S. allies. They want to see new weapons like longer-range artillery sent to Ukraine. The two sides could not strike a deal to revive the 2015 Iran nuclear agreement. Mitch McConnell fended off the first challenge in his nearly 16-year reign as party chief after Senator Rick Scott tried to unseat him as minority leader. The Democratic-led House impeached Trump in 2019 on charges that he withheld military aid to Ukraine to put pressure on President Volodymyr Zelensky to launch an investigation of Hunter Biden. The results of today's elections weren't what we hoped for. This is far from the end of our fight to make Washington work, Scott said in a statement. 27 Republicans voted for McConnell, who is now positioned to become the longest-serving party leader in Senate history. Andy Biggs, who challenged the California Republican but lost in a 18,831 vote, wrote on Twitter on Wednesday that the American people want us to turn a page. The hardline conservative House Freedom Caucus, whose members include Biggs, is pushing for rules changes that would make it easier for members to oust a speaker. Last week a federal judge in Texas ruled student loan forgiveness illegal for millions of borrowers. On Monday a three-judge panel in the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals decided that the temporary stay it placed on the relief will remain in place indefinitely. The Biden administration filed an appeal and expressed confidence that it will ultimately prevail in court. The case will probably end up at the Supreme Court, which has already dismissed two other conservative lawsuits seeking to block debt relief. The decision to keep the temporary stay on student loan forgiveness in place came from three Eighth Circuit judges, Bobby Shepard, Ralph Erickson and L. Stephen Grasz, both Trump appointees. It was in response to a lawsuit filed by 6 Republican-led states who argued the debt relief would harm their states' tax revenues. A bill that would codify same-sex and interracial marriage into federal law surpassed the 60-vote threshold during a procedural on Wednesday, setting the stage for last passage of the legislation later this week. The Respect for Marriage Act was first passed by the Democratic-controlled House in July amid concerns that the overturning of Roe v. Wade in June might put marriage equality at risk as well. The bill garnered 47 Republican votes when it passed the House in July, but momentum slowed when it reached the Senate, where Republicans expressed concerns about religious liberty protections. A group of bipartisan senators that included Democratic Sens Tammy Baldwin of Wisconsin and Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona, the only two openly LGBTQ members of the chamber, amended the legislation to assuage Republicans, releasing new bill text on Monday. Former White House Chief of Staff criticized Donald Trump's decision to run for the presidency in 2024, saying that he is the only Republican who can lose the race. Mulvaney said that Trump could be defeated in a head-to-head race by a popular challenger such as rising star Ron DeSantis. Trump is likely to be the Republican nominee in the Republican primary system, in which votes will be spread across several candidates. Mulvaney served as acting White House Chief of Staff from January 2019 to March 2020 and resigned as an envoy to Northern Ireland after the January 6, 2021 Capitol riot. He has been critical of Trump's post-presidential bid to win back power. The Respect for Marriage Act would repeal the Clinton-era Defense of Marriage Act and require states to recognize all marriages that were legal where they were performed. The legislation would also protect interracial marriages by requiring states to recognize legal marriages regardless of sex, race, ethnicity, or national origin. The legislation passed the House in a July vote with the support of 47 Republicans, a larger than expected number that gave the measure a boost in the Senate. On Tuesday, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints became the most recent conservative-leaning group to back the legislation. Many pundits think Trump cannot win the Republican nomination a third time given the fall of most of his endorsed candidates in last week's midterm elections, a disappointment for Republicans, and the rise of Ron DeSantis, the Trumpist governor of Florida. Major Trump donor Steven Schwartzman, chief executive of the private equity giant Blackstone, said he was out this time. Janel Brandtjen has been kicked out of the closed GOP caucus because her colleagues don't trust her, according to a letter sent to the lawmaker. The expulsion comes after Republicans failed to win a supermajority in the Assembly and Trump's endorsed candidate for governor lost to Democratic Gov. Tony Evers. Brandtjen of Menominee Falls was first elected to the Assembly in 2014. She has been one of the most vocal proponents of election conspiracy theories, holding hearings and inviting in speakers who have pushed lies about that election. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell has won re-election to that role, defeating a last-minute bid from Sen. Rick Scott RFL. Republicans elected McConnell 37,101 with one senator voting present, according to CNN. McConnell and Scott have long clashed over whether Republicans should put forth a specific policy agenda explaining what they would do with a majority. McConnell has favored the latter, while Scott introduced his own policy wish list earlier this year. Scott's list included many policies that the party's most traditional conservatives were against. The National Republican Senatorial Committee, which Scott headed this past cycle, has been reluctant to get involved in Republican primaries, arguing that doing so disregards the will of the voters. Republicans expressed concerns that the legislative process wasn't an open one that factored in different members' input.